So we're going to talk about a few things in regards to expectations of a C-suite or of an exco of all things program office, project management, program managers, whatever you will. It's a little bit interchangeable. So I'll go through a few things to set the conversation up and then come home with, what do I see as the half a dozen things that people should be really looking at and focusing on as they move forward. That's an agenda. We'll try and talk to something about that. We'll worry about that. Who are SAI Global? You may know us, you may not. We're a reasonably smallish company. We're ASX 200 listed. We're 2,500 people in 29 different countries around the world. We do a range of things. We do 55% of all property settlements in Australia on behalf of some of the big banks. We have 5 people who work in the spare parts line of Ferrari, checking the quality of third-party spare parts. I need to visit there. We also do 10,000 food and safety inspections for Burger King through Western Europe. Fairly diverse. We work with about 30 hospitals in the south of in Southern America doing risk assessment of their claims experience. So quite diverse across the world. And as I say, we're in 29 different countries. Here you may know us because if you go to the back of your push bike helmet or your motorcycle helmet or your pram, you'll hopefully see 5 ticks. And those 5 ticks are us. So we're the guys who are actually helping organisations make sure that their product or services are compliant to ISO or other regulations around the world. Bit of a plan, do, check, act, how we can work with different organisations across the spectrum of risk. So we like to work with enterprises across the top from a risk management perspective. And then as a vertical, we're focusing a little bit more these days on retail, agri and food businesses. So that paddock to plate journey. So when we work with Tesco in the UK, they've got 100,000 different suppliers who provide products to Tesco. We're on their panel to help validate who those people are so they don't sell too many more hamburgers full of horse, as they did last year. Business is becoming more and more complex. The pressures upon us within the business, the pressures upon us within an IT function where I come from or across the PMO is very, very difficult. And we're seeing that that's ramping up. We're seeing that that's ramping up in more ways than ever. We don't see that necessarily getting any slower. The speed of change will continue. But what I find ironic, and as I sit through these type of presentations, and John this morning, was that whilst the pressure's getting more on us and the speed of change is getting greater upon us, the fundamentals are still the same. There's still the concept of, what's the business strategy? What are you trying to achieve? There's still the concept of value. How do you create it? How do you sustain it? How do you implement it? And more importantly, there's execution. As an Ord Minnett Funds survey said of AMP many years ago, it's not about strategy, it's about consistent strategic execution. So how does we as a group of change professionals continue to be able to get better at executing project for value? Okay, so all the noise, all the outside stuff is still going to continue. That's still going to be there, it's going to ramp up, but we're still going to have that pressure on us. And John this morning spoke about a number of things and changes in the market. And if I put these under the heading of innovation, but let's talk about Web 2.0 or the Internet of Things. Let's talk about cloud computing. Let's talk about agile, and that's the noun, not the verb. I'm sick of walking into businesses who want to talk about agile. They've got no idea what it means, but let's talk about it because it's buzzy. And let's talk about the concept of failing fast. So whilst the methods and some of the technologies underlying are changing, I still go back to the fact that the fundamentals are the same in any business. What are you doing to generate revenue? What are you doing to cut your cost case? What are you doing to promote profit? How does the market respect that in terms of an EBITDA margin, et cetera, et cetera? How do you increase your company value? So it's going to get tougher and harder, but that's why we're in a job. Businesses do 2 things. Gartner will talk about the bimodal approach. We need to run a business and we need to change a business. And obviously pressures on executives are similar. You've got the pressures of run versus the pressures of change. Run in itself is getting much more complex than it ever has been because of the pace we've talked about, but just the complexity of the products and services that are now expected and demanded. And if we thought run's tough, well, change to me is a different league. Change is where it is much more complex because you're dealing with something that inherently is more ambiguous, that's not defined, and that's, again, the opportunity that you can get by driving value. Change normally deals with multiple parties, all with their own agendas. It's a leap into the unknown. You've got current state, you're defining a new state. So in order to do that, we need to make sure as professional change practitioners that obviously our foundation is sound. So with all these new things coming at us, we better make sure that we're actually under control today. Makes sense, doesn't it? Because if this pace of change is going to keep going, if these new technologies and new methods are going to come at us, if the pressure's going to get more, we better be good at what we're doing today. Does that make sense? Because if we're not ready today, if we're not match fit today, how are we going to go tomorrow? So how are we going? I think we all better give up and go home. Or maybe we already have. So who am I quoting here? I'm quoting from Standish Group International. 16% of projects deemed successful, and by that I presume it means achieve the benefits in the time frame that it spoke about. The vast majority of projects, to varying degrees, are failing. Does that resonate? Because if you're all running projects or portfolios that are 100%, then I might as well pack up and go home. I don't have anything to teach you. I don't have anything to talk about. So we can argue around the numbers of whether they're right or wrong or indifferent. But all of the academic studies, all the research theories I've seen, and these type of stats, which I saw 3 or 4 weeks ago for the first time, it all has a degree of that's about right. So my concern is that there is a massive crash point coming sooner or later that says we've got all this degree of change and pressure coming upon us, and we're trying to do that on a platform that doesn't have capability to execute in the current world. Now, they'll also tell us that if you look at world-class organisations, that their stats are vastly different and that they can actually succeed and be successful in project execution. So I suppose what you're going to get for the rest of this little session is my view of the world on what makes the difference between someone who's swimming through some pretty thick mud up here versus those who are actually performing down here. So from a PMO perspective, I suppose the first question to ask is, who are you and where are you? What type of PMO are you? So if we look at it from the bottom axis, just in terms of are you localised or are you playing at an enterprise level, and then again I'll borrow on Gartner from their definition of supporting, controlling or directing projects on that axis. If you're a PMO, where are you sitting and playing today? Because if you don't have the elevator pitch, if you can't describe that in 30 seconds, I think you're dead in the water. I think anyone who's playing across this bottom third, across the bottom there, I think you're dead in the water. That's my view. Won't ask for a show of hands. But if you're a project management office who are playing across here, as in you're doing local support only, effectively administrative, I would pack up and go home. I'm not necessarily a fan up here at the directing level, because directing level effectively says a centralised PMO appoints the project and is accountable for delivering that project. And I'm personally a little bit cautious about that because I really fundamentally believe in that the line who are sponsoring the change have to take accountability for executing the program. And whilst they can delegate that to project managers who may be lent out to them, they can't have a centralised group doing the project to them. So I'm not necessarily a fan of being in the top right-hand corner. But I am a fan that says that the Program Management Office can work across the enterprise and has a value-added role that they can play up towards that area there. And that's very much to me about working out in the portfolio across the business, who's bringing it all together. How do we bring the finance community, the business units, the IT community? How do we bring that and make sure it's aligned to the strategy? How do we manage that portfolio as a whole? And how do we report that to the Exco or the board as appropriate? So I think that the PMO does have a role to play in helping coordinate that across the organisation, as well as then putting in place standards and methods and templates and having all that stuff available, as well as doing the reporting and the packs and et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So they've got to do some of those other things, but that's not their value proposition in the first place. So I really do believe that the PMO needs to be sitting somewhere up towards that top star. One of the other articles actually referred to, if you're in the bottom third here, they actually referred to you as the zombie PMO, the Walking Dead. So I quite enjoyed that. So if you work on that premise that I've just put forward about how an EPMO can work across the business, then obviously there's a fair bit of work they can do in helping manage the capital portfolio of the organisation. Now, we're fortunate in SAI that, as well as running the IT function, I run the EPMO function. Well, I don't run the EPMO function. I have a very capable person who runs it for me, but we won't talk about her because she's over there and she'll get embarrassed. But she's very good, Angela. And what we've done over the last 6 months actually is rewritten and refocused the capital approach in the organisation. It was, without upsetting too many people in the room, very finance-centric over the past period of time. And so what we've really tried to do over the last 6 months, and we put this to the board and they signed it off and then we ran it this year, was to make it much more in terms of the portfolio. So it starts off with strategy. What's the organisation trying to do? What projects does that spawn? We then need to have that capital view for the 12 months, rolling 12-month period. What's that capital plan? We then talk about the pipeline. We actively know what's coming up. We know who's sponsoring it. We know when the concept. We know when the final business case is coming. We know when it's going to go to the board for approvals. Once it's approved, we then manage it as part of a normal portfolio with all the standard type of reports, etc. We're now working through what does organisational change mean? How do we know as an executive what's coming up in the next quarter to implement? Are we ready as an organisation from a change management perspective? Are we heightened in terms of the benefits we're going to get out of those projects? And then how do we do benefits realisation? I worked, very fortunate to work 10 years or so ago for a private equity organisation. And when I mean private equity, I mean the billionaire sitting opposite you on the table. And I had a university ring me up and wanted to discuss about benefits realisation frameworks. And they said, how does it work then? I said, well, it's pretty easy actually. You know, we put up a business case. They say yay or nay, and then they change our budget the next day accordingly. And the guy was saying, but don't they come along in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? Don't they do a review? Don't they do a study? And we said, no. They just change the business case the next day. They give you a broken payment to get from the start of the project through to when you implement. But if you couldn't then meet your budget, you're exposed. So it wasn't a reactionary, let's go back and check it after the event. It was right up front and it's in your face. And you know, they put nice carrots in front of us to keep us galloping in the right direction. That's what private equity does. But there was no mucking around as whether we could or couldn't meet our benefits. So you got your project budget, you got a broken payment to get through, and then that was that. If you couldn't meet it, you were shown up. Certainly kept you focused. I think it was either Andre or Ray or John earlier, you know, and talking about how everyone was a project manager, then a program manager, then a program director. And I agree. I see this debate all the time. Everyone wants to be a program director and this, that and the other, and they can't actually tell me then what it means. But I think there is a lot of debate at times, a lot of tosh around project versus program. At the end of the day, we can talk about strategic programs and various things coming together, but we need to decompose things down to pieces of work that can actually be executed. The analogy I'll use here is that, you know, it's Friday night, school's just broken up, you've got some hungry kids in the back, you're going camping. You turn up at a campground at 10 o'clock at night, the wind's picked up, it's starting to rain. You can spend the next 3 days debating about how you put up the tent with you and your partner, or you can just put the first tent peg in the ground. preferably you're upwind and the tent's blowing the other way, not blowing back at you. But sooner or later, you've got to put a tent peg in the ground and actually stake out what the project's going to do. And I just see too often esoteric debates about projects or programs and we're going to change the world and it's going to take forever, etc., and people don't get on with it. I think you need to be as pragmatic as possible and break down that program, because as it says, programs inherently go for many years. Programs inherently aren't super defined. Programs will evolve over time. Programs will have multifacets. But if we're going to fail fast, if we're going to learn quickly, if we're going to move on, if we're going to be agile in our approach, how do you take that program, which can be quite conceptual by nature, and break down a specific objective or executable that you need to do into a project and get a team acting on that? And that's not the job of a project team. I think the PMO can help facilitate that and are very well positioned to facilitate it, but it's very much the role of sponsors and leaders to actually set that direction on a project or program. Once you've done that, there's a whole lot of words here. I can't be bothered reading them. I'm sure you can read them quicker than I can read them. I just, work breakdown structures in business cases and in plans are fantastic, great, and the work breakdown structures all looks official up front. And then we let the project team off to run and they come back with 17,000 rows of Gantt chart or something, or other tasks and activities. And that's where my eyes get a bit bored there. So, what I really want to see is a logical breakdown of the project. And forgive me, because I don't care what methodology we're using or what technology or business change program, but things have got to, I'm a bloke, so I'm a bit simple, but things have got to start, they've got a middle, and they've got an end, okay? So all I'm looking for from a project is how do I get a start, a middle, get some stuff done and get an end, and then I can go again, then I can go again, okay? Projects, programs. And I see project reports and Gantt charts go off and some great esoteric definitions of things. And I scratch my head and I've got a couple of brain cells left, but I read the deliverables and they just don't make common sense to me. So my challenge is, how can you go into any of your steering committees and challenge any of the steering committee members, let alone the sponsor, to draw your project on the board? That's a test. Right? So go back, think of a project. Can every one of the sponsors or steering committee members draw the project? Can they just go, here's a high-level flow of what we're going to achieve and what's going to be delivered? And I would bet, and again, someone said it earlier, I'm glad I'm not on after lunch because you'd be asleep and or they would have already said it all, but most of this stuff is common sense, but how many of your sponsors could draw a timeline of that project? Unsolicited, on the board. If they can't, what are they doing on the steering committee? Why are they there? If they're a passenger, who talked about this earlier? If they're a passenger, if they turn up, John did. If they're a passenger, if they turn up, read a deck and go, then don't have them on the steering committee. And the PMO or the program manager needs to go to the sponsor and tell them that because they're a passenger. So I like to see some logical milestones. They have to be written in English. And I don't say that as in terms of English language. I mean, they have to be written not from a techie perspective. Every milestone must be an artefact. There's a deliverable. It might be a design document. It might be a new server is installed. It might be a whatever it is, but it's physical. I'd also encourage, for those who are project or program managers in the room, or even the PMOs, there's a bit of theatre in this. When you've hit a milestone, when you've actually delivered something, walk into the next steering committee and drop it on the table. Because you've no doubt sent the packs out the week before and the steering committee have got to go through this much gump. We'll talk about that soon. But if there's a design document that's been signed off, then walk in and drop 3 copies on the table. It's actually an achievement. It's good. But it also means the steering committee can pick it up, can smell it, can weigh it, can turn over the page to see in their teams who's reviewed it, and you can have a bit of a sniff. Because guess what? The execs don't have time to read it all. They're relying on their people to actually give them advice, and there's a sniff test involved because it ain't a science. So if I can pick a document up, feel that it's got the right weight to it, see the table of contents, see who in my team's reviewed it, I've at least got half a start that I'm going to be involved in it, okay? But I think get the structure of your program right. And for me, a milestone, and it tied in earlier with this comment on steering committees. Yeah, I'm not a fan of fixed monthly steering committees. I actually prefer a steering committee every 2 to 3 weeks, not weekly. I'm not a fan of weeklies because it gets too involved operationally. But every 2 to 3 weeks. But guess what it should be aligned with? When the project's actually doing stuff, not because it happens to be in the meeting. Okay? While we're talking about sponsors, I think the expression is fish rot from the head first. I'm not a fisherman, but I think that's the comment. Sponsors are the most important person on a project. Simple as that. Because it's their project. There is no project without a sponsor. And you need to have a good sponsor. So again, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but if you're a PMO manager, and maybe Angela should leave the room while I ask this, but if you're a PMO manager and or a program manager, project manager on a project, and you don't have a good sponsor or sponsorship, I really, really encourage you to go back to your office this afternoon and pick up the phone and call the headhunters. Because you will fail. You will fail. Simple as that. You need to find someone who's going to back you. It's easy to say when you're up here, isn't it? So I did a lot of my project management training back when, as my wife would say, I had a proper job many years ago under Rob Tomset, for those who know Tomset. And this is a slightly bastardised Tomset view of the world, but this is the 4 Bs of sponsorship. He had 3 Bs, I've added to it. So the 4 Bs of sponsorship. First of all, the sponsor needs a brain. And judging from a couple of the looks in the room, I know you know that some of your sponsors don't have a brain. But the sponsor needs to set the objective. I need this project too. The objective of this project is. That's the sponsor's job. It's not for the project team or the PMO to define it. That's the sponsor's job. And that needs to be someone in a senior executive role in the line of business that's trying to achieve something. We'll get to that bit later on. So the sponsor needs to have a brain. So what? Is this a reasonable objective? My objective is I want to climb Mount Everest. Is that reasonable? Okay, so we've got an objective. They need a bag of money. Second B, bag of money. Because I hear a lot of sponsors, and I heard it earlier in one of the conversations or questions. I'm trying to think of the question I can ask so I can get a bottle of wine. They need a bag of money. There's lots of sponsors who have that objective. I want to climb Everest, who then turn around and tell me and say, go and do it. But they don't actually fund them. They expect a project team to go off and do it as well as their day job. That bimodal stuff we spoke about earlier, the run and the change. Change needs specific resources, specific budgets, specific focus. And if the sponsor doesn't have a bag of money, don't accept the project. That's their job to get the funding, not the PMOs or the project managers. Third thing, they need to be successful. So they've got a brain, they've got a bag of money. The third thing they need is a baseball bat or any other behaviourally modifying tool. They need to help the project team clear the way. They're there to help clear roadblocks. Okay, so there are time and place where the sponsor needs to act as a senior executive and clean the way. They need to help the project team. Not because they're nice and cuddly and warm, not because they love the project team, because that's what they want to achieve. Okay, so let's, why am I up here? Because you guys have already said it all. Because as someone said earlier, it's what are they trying to achieve? What's their objective? What's their KPI? If they're not interested or bought into what they're trying to achieve, if they're not prepared to help the project team clear the way, then you need to think about the projects that you're working on. And the last B, so set the brain off, we've got an objective, we've got the bag of money, we've actually funded the team's getting on and doing their job, and now they're clearing the way with their baseball bat, is to deliver the benefits or gather the benefits. So the benefits. Benefit realisation is all about the sponsor. That's why they did the project in the first place. Okay? So as a project team or as an EPMO, there's various levers, and you need to have this relationship with your sponsor. So levers are crudely time, cost, scope, quality, risk. And you need to work out which levers are driving that sponsor. So time, scope, cost, quality and risk are the levers as a project manager that I've got in front of me, and I need to work out what my sponsor, what their drivers are. Okay? Because that's how I'm going to then run my project. And the scope statement to me, and I've joined an organisation where things tended to just move to the right, move to the right, move to the right, the scope statement needs to be tied down up front. And a scope statement is not requirements. Scope statement is not requirements. We get lost in the anal detail of trying to work out what's going to be on what cell, on what report in 9 months' time, 6 months' time. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the parameters of the project, where it's going to go, where it's not going to go, and putting appropriate brackets around that so that we understand. So the objective was we want to climb Everest, yeah? So the scope statement, do you wish to do it with oxygen, yes or no? Are you going to climb solo, or are you going to take a team of Sherpas with you, yes or no? Are you going to fly in, you're going to get a donkey in, or are you going to walk like Tim McCartney did, Snape did from the Bay of Bengal all the way to the base camp, yes or no? That's the scope statement. Once you've understood that, you can then start to cost up the project accordingly. Make sense? By the way, just before I leave on this slide, objectives are important as well. What's our objective here? We're going to climb Everest, yeah? Cool? Just take on board that 1 in 7 die and 3/4 of them die on the way down, not on the way up. So your objective may be to climb Everest. 3/4 of the people who die have already climbed Everest. They're on their way home. What do I need from my PMO and from my programs team? I need some bravery, please. The number of steering committees I sit into, and it's like watching a car crash in slow motion, and everyone knows what's about to happen and no one has the bottle to say anything. Why? Why? Sadomasochistic behaviours, or what is it? Right? There's going to be a train crash. What are we going to do now to stop it? Okay? Make sure when you go in with your steering committee that you have at least one question or one decision to be made, or at least one piece of advice requested. First of all, because it's a steering committee, they're there to give you advice and make decisions. Second of all, they're senior people who don't have a lot of time. Thirdly, they're senior people who have got egos. So I'd never go into a steering committee without a decision or a piece of advice required. It's part of the game, okay? So let's talk about it. You know, in terms of, I took over a group of project managers 12 or 13 years ago. I think there were 70 people, and they had 28 different titles. Right, so it's just got worse. How am I going for time? Because you're not flashing any. I'm okay, good. I don't want to get in trouble. And I'm a simple bloke, if that's not tautological. You know, project leaders, project managers, program managers. That's about it. You can call them what you like. You can have 3 layers, 4 layers, 17 layers, but project leader, project manager, program manager. And what's the difference? Well, at project leader level, it's mainly technical activity. Gantt charting, risk and issues management, financial reporting, etc. At a project manager level, it's more about that, project managing. It's about business case, running a team, project outputs, executions, etc. At the program manager level, it's behavioural. It's all behavioural. What do I mean by that? You're going to be dealing with ambiguity. You're going to be dealing with politics. You're going to be dealing with change. You're going to be dealing with influence and negotiation. You're going to be telling the CEO they're wrong and getting away with it, if you're a good one. But that's the point. You've got to be prepared to tell senior executives, and these guys inherently, guys and gals, these guys are inherently more senior hierarchically than you are. That's just the nature of it. But you've got to be prepared to tell them they're wrong, and for what reasons. And that's the behavioural skill set of someone who's at a program manager, program director level. So I see lots of people who want the fancy title and think it's about bigger projects. It's got nothing to do with the size of the zeros on the project. It's more about how you act and behave and how it changes from, again, technical skills, managerial skills to behavioural skills. God, I hate PowerPoint. I really do. It's like, it'd be like running Parliament on Twitter. Well, which we do almost. PowerPoint has its purpose, but it's not the start or the finish, right? It's so much more critical that you have the right information to hand. And again, I think John touched on this earlier. So I love if I'm talking to a PM in the corridor, you know, what's your actual today, what's your burn rate? If they don't know that type of answer to those type of questions, then that worries me because they're in charge of the project. You know, how are your milestones going? What's due in the next 3 weeks? If they don't know that, then they're not in charge of their project. It's so important, and John touched on it earlier and Ray did, you know, we don't want decks and, or Andre did, don't want decks and decks of information. It needs to be short, sharp, to the point. But it needs to be the right information, and yes, it needs to absolutely talk about the factual status of the project, but more importantly, start to give you headlights. And as was said earlier, too often, just too often, it's talking about the past. And this flows on from that. So in my world, no one gets shot for having a red project. There's no issue with having a red project. You only, in my world, get shot for 2 reasons. One, green, 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 red. That's a surprise. And the other one is, it's red, and by the way, I've got no idea and no recommendation. Now, I'm being rude in saying shot. It sometimes means, look, we've just got the wrong person, let's move them sideways. But sometimes it does mean they need to leave the organisation, okay? But you can't go green, 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 red, because that says that you've been managing over your shoulder and you haven't been looking forward. And if we have our logical milestones and we've got our fact base on the table and we've got sensible steering committee with good sponsorship in a timely manner, we should never go green, 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 red. Nothing wrong with a red project. All a red project is saying is that on the current basis, the project team cannot meet the time, scope, cost, quality or risk of this project without external help. And that external help is the senior representatives of the people involved, aka a steering committee. Okay? So, I missed all the other signs. You give me 5 minutes to go. I didn't even get any of the others. I was too busy rambling. And then likewise, if the project's red, even though you need external help, that's not to say, well, steering committee tell us what to do. It still is, here is the situation, here's how we found ourselves, these are the alternatives we've got, this is what we recommend. Because you want people who are thinking. There is no such thing as a technical project. It's all about business change. It's all about business benefit. IT people, can I have a hands up? Who's more IT affiliated in the room versus who's more business? IT people? IT people? Yeah, okay, half-ish. IT people are good at projects. We've been doing it for 30 plus years. We're that type of geeky person, we like that type of thing. What we tend to do is go off and do it in the corner on our own. What we don't do is necessarily do that joint effort with the business. And what the business don't do is step up and engage in the project and then wonder why it gets thrown over the fence from IT later on. Now, obviously, the agile methods, if they're used successfully, can actually address a lot of those things because it's joint design and a few other things. But it's so important that that whole business change program be built into the project plan on day one. And again, when I look at work breakdown structures, normally it's really heavy on the technical aspects, but it's very light on the business aspects. So I kind of break it down into saying there's a governance layer, there's a project management layer, and there's an SDLC layer or a technical lifecycle layer. And I'm looking for what are the deliverables out of both layers. There's technical deliverables, but there's project management deliverables through that, and they're much more associated with change, communication, training and development, et cetera, et cetera. So they all need to be there. And to finish up, project teams are directly accountable for the outputs of a project. And as we said earlier, the benefits is the responsibility of the sponsor. But we need to make sure we're not at cross purposes here. Because project teams will then get defensive and say, oh, I'm only responsible for delivering the box or the report. So I can give you the world's best sales report. So there's the artifact, there's the deliverable, there's the world's best sales report. Is the project successful? The project in its output may well be successful, but until that sales report is actually picked up and used and generates new income, the project's a failure. So again, we've got this slight contradiction because the project team's responsible for the outputs. Well, we need to make sure the outputs includes not only the report, but the change program, the training, the communication, etc. that goes around it. And the other thing that I just absolutely want to insist in seeing in the scope statement is not only does it cover all of the change pieces, but it actually includes in the scope of every project the means of measuring the benefit success. Because I see lots of projects that go live and then you turn around 2 months later and say, is it successful? And they say, well, we don't know. We can't measure that. So we're designing projects that actually don't meet the business benefit or can't prove the business benefit for why they were set up in the first place, which kind of doesn't make sense. So that's the slides. So, you know, if we go back to where we started from, lots of pressure on us in organisations, and that ain't going to stop. We've got pressures on us to run businesses which are operational. It's all about quality and efficiency in the operational space to me. From a project perspective, it's difficult and it's hard, but it's all about effectiveness and value. How do you create effectiveness and value? So as practitioners in this space, we need to be able to show and lead the business. And as I say, I don't care whether you're in a PMO or a project program management role. These are some of the things to me, I hope they haven't been too motherhood, that actually get down to the crux that says, do you have a reasonable chance of success, whether it's a technical project or a business project, of delivering that business benefit? And it starts with your relationship with your business in terms of the PMO. What value do you add, or what value proposition do you have? And from a project team in perspective, it starts upon your relationship with your sponsor and how you manage that through the life cycle. And that's me.